All right, welcome. We're going to learn about for loops today, but before we get to that, we have one more while loop for you to try. This is very similar to like a sample AP question. So we want to figure out what is being printed here. Get out a piece of paper, write down some notes or thoughts on this one. I definitely think a table of your variables here would be helpful. All right, pause the video, give it a shot. Okay, so I got my table here for number and digit, and then I also a spot where what gets printed. So number initially is going to be 1593. That's the initial value, and then this line here, this mod 10, will just take the last digit. It's the remainder when you divide by 10, so that'll just essentially be the last digit. So in this case, digit becomes 3, gets set to the value of 3. And then we print out whatever digit is times 3. So the first time through it's 9. And then this line at the end, what it actually does is it chops off the last digit in the number. So number currently is 1593. We divide that by 10, so we get 159.3. But because of the way ints work, it just truncates it, so it chops off the last digit, and number now becomes 159. Okay, we're going to keep looping while number is greater than 0. So we do this digit line again, which just takes the last digit, mod 10. We print out 3 times that. Okay, and then again, when we run this line, it's just going to truncate. It would be 15.9 here when we divide by 10, but it just truncates that, and so we end up chopping off the last digit. Now we just have 15. Still greater than 0, so digit is now the last digit, 5. We print out 3 times that. All right, and then come down here, number truncates to 1. 1.5 truncates to 1 when you divide by 10. Now we're going to take the last, number is still greater than 0. So now we take the last digit, which is just 1. All right, so 1 mod 10 is just 1. You just have a remainder of 1. It prints off 3 times that, so just 3. And then number now truncates. 1 divided by 10 is 0.1, and that truncates to 0. And now number is no longer greater than 0. So it ends there, and so what gets printed is 3 times each digit in the number, basically. So it gets 3 times, in the reverse order, I guess, 3 times 3, 3 times 9, 3 times 5, 3 times 1. Okay, so kind of a goofy loop, but definitely you'll see this mod 10, divide 10 a bunch on the AP test, and it's just getting the digits one at a time going this direction in your number. Okay, so we're learning our second of our 2 loops today, and so we are going to do the for loop is what's new. We already did while loop like we did in the warm-up, and now we're going to do for loops. And I got 3 questions for you to see what you remember here. Pause the video before watching the answers to this. See if you can remember your answers. Okay, so a loop is just code that repeats. Okay, and so you have the 2 different loops because we use a while loop when we don't know how many times we will loop. And the best example I always think for that is logging in, right? We have to keep looping until they enter the correct login. So we don't know how many times that is. Maybe it's only once, maybe it's 5 times. So if we don't know how many times, we use a while loop. And then we use a for loop when we know the number of times we want to loop, right? So basically, if you have to loop through the numbers 1 to 100, or if you have to loop through from 1 to however many students you have in a class, basically if you know the number of loops, then we can use a for loop. Kind of interestingly, as I've programmed over the years, I would say like 90% of the time or more I'm using for loops versus while loops. They're just more common. Oftentimes you're just looping through a number of items. So you're looping through every character in a game and giving them 5 extra gold or something like that. So the for loops are actually much more common. And these are general guidelines, right? I think you can use while loops in place of for loops if you wanted, but it really just depends on the situation. And generally for loops are going to be more common. Okay, so as far as what does a for loop look like, um, it's got this sort of setup. So we do for, and then we do an initial condition that's only going to run once. Okay, and then it's like initialization, I guess, not initial condition. The second part will be like the true false condition. Okay, and if it was false right away, it would just skip right down and go to the whatever next line comes in the code. And then if the condition is true, it'll run the statements. After the statements run, it'll like increment a variable or decrement, usually increment. Then it'll go back and check the condition one more time, not one more time, but again. If it's true, it'll run the statements, come back and increment, check, and it'll keep doing this loop, incrementing and checking, running the statements until it's no longer true, and then it'll exit and go down and do the rest of the code. So these three parts run over and over and over again, and the initialization runs only once in the beginning. Okay, so let's take an example, a look at one here in Eclipse, and it's inside of the main as always. And basically you can see we're actually on this line declaring an int named I, and we give it an initial value of 0. So this line runs first, creates the I variable, and that'll say as long as I is less than 5, which it is, so it'll come down here and run this line, and it'll print out 0 with a space. Then it'll come up and increment I to be 1. 1 is less than 5. It'll come down here and print, right? And then it'll come up here, increase again. Now I will be 2. 2 is less than 5. Print it out, etc., etc. So maybe this would be a good time to pause the video and see if you can figure out what is going to be printed in this particular example. All right, so hopefully you figured out that the last time through I will be 4, which is less than 5, so it'll print 4. It'll come up here, become 5. 5 is not less than 5, so it'll go down and exit the loop. So it's going to print 0 to 4, and 5 never gets printed. All right, so there's your first example. So I'm just going to throw a bunch more at us and see if we can read them. Again, this is what they look like: an initial value, semicolon, a condition, semicolon, and then how the variable changes, right, goes here. And there's usually no semicolon at the end of this one. It's kind of like an implied semicolon. So you have 3 parts separated by semicolons inside your for loop. Let's look at some more examples. Okay, so see if you can make sense of what's happening on this one. Pause the video. Okay, so we initialize k to be 10, and then we keep this as while k is greater than 10, right? We print this line, print whatever k is with a space, and then minus minus k. All right, so basically we're going to start at 10 and then go 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 1 is still greater than 0, it'll print, and then I'll come back here, minus minus becomes 0, and then 0 is no longer greater than 0, so it won't print the 0. I think it'll just print 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then stop. All right, so again, a semicolon here and here, initial condition, what initial value, a condition that you check, what lines of code you want to run, and then changing the variable there. And I'm going to keep throwing examples at you. All right, pause the video and see if you can figure out what's going to be printed here. All right, so j starts at 0, and we're checking less than or equal to 10 each time we print j with a space. Some couple differences here. One, j goes up by 2 this time. So instead of doing just by 1, we're doing j is 2 more than it was before. So it's going to go 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. And then the also difference here is it will print the 10, because once j becomes 10, 10 is less than or equal to 10. So it'll print 10, come back up here, j will become 12, and then it'll fail the check. 12 is not less than or equal to 10. So this will print 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. All right, another example for you. Pause the video, see if you can figure out what happens here. All right, in this one, D starts off as 1, and then we go while we're less than 100, printing out D. So you think it might be a lot of numbers because you start at 1 and go less than 100, but we're doubling each time. So we're going to print 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and then it'll double to something that's bigger than 100, and it will not print it anymore. So it'll do all the numbers doubling as long as we're less than 100. Okay. Okay, so kind of a different example here. This one uses a string, and it's a little bit different, but I'm going to pause the video and see if you can make some sense of it before unpausing and watching the solution to this. Okay, so I like to just figure out what is I gonna be. So here, hopefully, we can see that word.length is 8 because there's 8 letters in parabola, and I starts at 0 and increases by 2. So just to make some sense of that, we could make a little note here. I is going to be 0, 2, 4, 6, but not 8, right? Because word.length is 8, and we are staying less than that. So we are staying less than 8. Okay, so we know that I loops through those 4 spots. Okay, and essentially what this does is it gets the letter at position I. All right, so please note that this I plus 1 doesn't actually increase I by 1. You know, it looks different than here. Here, actually, I is going to increase by 2. In this particular case, we're just doing the ith substring from position I to 1 past I. All right, so that's going to get that letter and then print it out with a space. So I'm going to jump over here and take a look at this more in depth. So we have parabola, and we are doing, remember our I values were 0, 2, 4, and 6. Okay, and so when I do the substring from 0, so when I is 0, remember substring is I to I plus 1. So I'm going to do from 0 to 1, and that's going to get me the letter. So from 0 to 1, remember substring runs 1 pass, so that's going to get us just the P. Okay, and then when we do substring, now I is going to be 2, so we're going to do from 2 to 3. And again, that's going to get us this letter R right there. So you can hopefully see it starting to alternate letters. Next up, I is 4. So we're going to be from 4 to 5, which would get us the letter B. And then the last time I is 6. So we're going to do from 6 to 7. And that's going to get us the letter L. Okay, so it's going to print out these letters with a space between them. P, R, B, L. So we can run it and just verify that that is indeed what we get. Okay, so that's kind of tricky, but it starts to show, you know, you can loop through all the letters essentially. Here we're skipping every other letter, but that's where you're going to use loops a lot, is to like loop through a set of items. Like in this case, we're looping through a set of letters. So that's real common for loops. All right, that is all. Thank you for watching.